Be me, name is Corbin. 35 years old. Senior backend developer. 9 years building infrastructure. Watched our platform burn. While we attended empathy workshops. Management set our communication tone. Mattered more than the servers crashing. The servers disagreed. And so did everyone who knew how to fix them. We all quit. The servers are still crashing. This is the story of how prioritizing soft skills over syntax destroyed a functional engineering department. How mandatory empathy workshops replaced critical bug fixes in our daily priorities. How syntax sensitivity reviews scrutinized our code comments for emotional impact while the actual code was breaking. And how every senior developer walked out when we realized our decades of expertise mattered less than our collaborative vibration. Compilers don't care about your feelings. Servers don't attend workshops. Bugs don't respond to empathy. We tried to explain this. Management called it resistance. So we stopped explaining and started packing. The company was Vertex Solutions, a mid-sized SaaS platform providing analytics dashboards for e-commerce clients. Our backend processed millions of data points daily, generating real-time insights that helped online retailers optimize their operations. When our systems worked, clients made money. When they didn't, clients lost money and called us very unhappy. The engineering team was about 40 people. Backend, front-end, infrastructure, data science. A mix of veterans and newer hires. Working together reasonably well. Shipping features, fixing bugs. Maintaining systems that mostly worked. The kind of functional mediocrity that keeps companies alive. Thornton was our most senior developer, 46 years old with 18 years of experience, the last 8 at Vertex. He had written significant portions of our core analytics engine. He understood legacy code that predated most of the current team. When something mysterious broke at 2 a.m., Thornton was the one who could diagnose it from the error patterns alone. Marlowe handled our infrastructure. 38 years old, 12 years in DevOps. She kept our servers running, our deployments smooth, our monitoring systems actually monitoring. She had opinions about code quality that she expressed directly, sometimes too directly, for some people's comfort. But her infrastructure never went down. I was somewhere in between, senior enough to understand the architecture, junior enough to still be learning from Thornton. My job was maintaining the data pipeline, making sure information flowed correctly, from collection to processing to display. The plumbing that nobody sees until it breaks. Waverly became our new engineering manager in early 2025. She came from a background in organizational development and had transitioned into tech management through a program designed to bring diverse leadership perspectives to engineering teams. She had completed a coding bootcamp and understood basic concepts, but had never shipped production code or maintained live systems. Her first initiative was what she called the Empathy First Framework, a fundamental reorientation of how our department operated, moving away from what she called toxic technical meritocracy toward a more holistic evaluation of contribution that weighted soft skills equally with technical output. The framework was introduced at an all-hands meeting in February. Waverly explained that traditional engineering culture overvalued technical skills at the expense of emotional intelligence. That code quality mattered, but so did how we communicated about code. That our reviews of each other's work should consider not just logical accuracy, but emotional impact. She introduced the concept of syntax sensitivity, a new standard for technical communication. Code comments would be reviewed for tone. Pull request feedback would be evaluated for how it made the recipient feel. Technical accuracy was still important, but delivery was now equally weighted. In performance evaluations, Thornton raised his hand and asked a practical question. If a piece of code had a critical bug that would crash production, how should that feedback be delivered? Waverly said the feedback should be constructive and supportive, focusing on growth opportunities rather than failures. Thornton asked if the servers would wait for growth-oriented feedback while they were crashing. Waverly said his framing was adversarial. The mandatory workshops began the following month. Bi-weekly sessions, 2 hours each, focused on developing emotional intelligence and inclusive communication skills. Attendance was required for all engineering staff. The workshops covered topics like active listening, conflict resolution, nonviolent communication, and recognizing microaggressions in technical feedback. The first workshop conflicted with a deployment window. We had scheduled a critical update that required senior engineering oversight. Waverly said the workshop was mandatory. The deployment could be rescheduled. Thornton asked what would happen to the users waiting for the bug fixes in that update. Waverly said our personal development was also important. The deployment was rescheduled. The bug fixes were delayed a week. Clients who had been waiting for those fixes were not pleased. Customer support handled the complaints while we sat in a conference room discussing how to give feedback that honored the recipient's emotional journey. Seraphine from HR facilitated the workshops. She was enthusiastic about the curriculum, genuinely believed in its importance, and seemed confused when engineers asked how role-playing conflict resolution would help us fix database deadlocks. She said the skills were transferable. We said database deadlocks weren't interested in conflict resolution. The workshops included exercises that felt designed for a different profession. We role-played giving feedback on code, with partners playing the recipient. If the recipient felt criticized, the feedback was considered ineffective, regardless of whether it was accurate. Accuracy without empathy was apparently worse than inaccuracy with kindness. Thornton walked out of the third workshop. He stood up in the middle of an exercise about reframing critical feedback as growth opportunities, said he had actual work to do, and left. Waverly documented the incident. HR scheduled a meeting with him about his commitment to team development. Meanwhile, the code base was accumulating debt. Bugs that should have been fixed weren't, because the engineers who could fix them were in workshops learning about feelings, or were having their technical feedback rejected for being insufficiently supportive. The code didn't care about our feelings. It just kept breaking. Marlowe received a performance review that praised her technical contributions but flagged concerns about her communication style. Her infrastructure had 99.9% uptime. Her direct feedback about code quality had hurt some people's feelings. These two facts were weighted equally in her review. She was recommended for additional soft skills training. She asked if the additional training would be required instead of her actual job, or in addition to it. Waverly said it would be in addition, that Marlowe needed to find time for her professional development while maintaining her technical responsibilities. Marlowe asked when she was supposed to sleep. Waverly said that was an adversarial framing. The syntax sensitivity reviews became increasingly absurd. Code comments that said, "This function is broken," were flagged as negative. The suggested alternative was, "This function has opportunities for improved functionality." Comments that said, "Do not modify this section," were flagged as exclusionary. The suggestion was, "Please collaborate with the team before exploring changes to this section." The problem was that some functions were broken, and some sections should not be modified by people who didn't understand them. The direct language existed for a reason: to prevent mistakes, to communicate clearly, to save time that would be wasted if everything had to be wrapped in supportive language. I received feedback on a pull request comment where I had written, "This will cause a null pointer exception in production." The feedback said my comment lacked constructive framing and might make the author feel inadequate. The suggested revision was, "Have you considered the possibility that this code path might encounter unexpected null values? I'd love to explore this with you." The code still had a null pointer exception, regardless of how we discussed it. The server didn't care whether we explored it lovingly or pointed it out directly. It would crash either way. But now it would crash with better feelings about the crash. The first major outage happened in April. A database connection issue that Thornton would have diagnosed in minutes went unresolved for hours because Thornton was in a workshop about recognizing implicit bias in code reviews. By the time the workshop ended and he got to his desk, the issue had cascaded into broader system instability. Clients lost access to their dashboards during their peak business hours. Revenue was affected. Contracts were questioned. Waverley scheduled a post-mortem that focused on communication during the incident, not on why our most experienced engineer was in a workshop instead of at his station. Thornton submitted his resignation the following week. His letter was brief, stating that he could no longer work in an environment that prioritized emotional process over functional outcomes. He had accepted a position at a company that still valued technical expertise. He wished everyone well and hoped the servers would too. His departure created immediate problems. Systems he had built over 8 years now had no one who fully understood them. The documentation existed, but was incomplete, because Thornton had planned to finish it eventually, before workshops consumed his time, before he decided to leave, before it was too late. Marlowe resigned 2 weeks later. She cited similar reasons, adding that she refused to apologize for being direct about technical matters when directness prevented failures. Her 99.9% uptime would now belong to someone else. Or to no one, which is what actually happened. I held out longer than I should have, partly because I hoped things would change, partly because I had colleagues I cared about, partly because leaving felt like giving up on something I had helped build. But every week the workshops continued, and every week the codebase deteriorated, and every week the gap between our priorities and reality grew wider. The breaking point for me was a production incident that happened during a mandatory session on inclusive retrospectives. Our analytics pipeline was throwing errors that affected multiple clients. Finch, the junior developer left monitoring things, was overwhelmed and didn't know how to diagnose the issue. He needed help. We were discussing how to make sprint retrospectives more welcoming. I asked to be excused to help with the incident. Waverley said the session was mandatory, that Finch needed to develop his troubleshooting skills through hands-on experience. I said he was developing the experience of watching everything break, while the people who could help discussed feelings in a conference room. She documented my resistance. The incident took 4 hours to resolve instead of the 40 minutes it would have taken with senior involvement. Clients lost data during the outage. Finch was traumatized by the experience, blamed himself for not knowing things nobody had taught him because the people who would have taught him were either gone or in workshops. I resigned the next day. 9 years at Vertex ended because I couldn't watch anymore. Couldn't pretend that empathy workshops were equivalent to keeping systems running. Couldn't accept that my communication tone mattered more than whether the code worked. The servers didn't attend my exit interview. They just kept crashing. The exodus accelerated after my departure. 7 more senior engineers left within 2 months. Each departure removed institutional knowledge that couldn't be replaced quickly. The junior staff who remained were talented but overwhelmed, maintaining systems they didn't fully understand, without mentors to guide them. Finch became the most senior back-end developer, at 25 years old, with 2 years of experience, responsible for systems that had taken decades to build. He called me once, late at night, asked how to handle a specific error that I had seen Thornton fix years ago. I walked him through it, but I couldn't be there for every error. Nobody could. The platform's stability deteriorated rapidly. Outages that used to happen once a quarter started happening weekly. Response times that used to be minutes became hours. The remaining team was exhausted, demoralized, and increasingly incapable of maintaining systems that required expertise they didn't have. Whitmore represented a major e-commerce client, whose dashboards were now unreliable, whose data was sometimes missing, whose business decisions were being affected by our inability to keep things running. He terminated the contract, said he needed partners who prioritized function over whatever we were prioritizing. He wasn't wrong. Aldrich, our CTO, finally intervened 6 months after the exodus began. He acknowledged that the department was in crisis, that retention had failed catastrophically, that the empathy-first framework had not delivered the benefits anticipated. He reassigned Waverley to a different role and began reaching out to departed engineers about returning. Thornton declined. He was happy at his new company, which evaluated him on whether his code worked, not on how his feedback made people feel. Marlowe had started consulting, was earning more than she ever had, and had no interest in returning to a company that had told her uptime mattered less than tone. I was already settled somewhere that respected technical judgment. The company reached out to dozens of departed engineers. Almost all declined. Why would we return to an environment that had told us our expertise was secondary to our emotional availability, that had valued workshops over work, feelings over function, until the function failed, and the feelings couldn't fix it? Waverly moved to a different department, then left the company entirely. Her LinkedIn now describes her as a transformation consultant, helping companies build empathetic cultures. Presumably, she'll help them build the same results we achieved. Perfect communication about broken systems that nobody left knows how to fix. Seraphine still runs workshops somewhere, still believes in the curriculum, still confused about why engineers resist learning to be more emotionally available while their servers burn. Some people never connect the dots between what they're teaching and what actually happens. When the teaching replaces the doing, Vertex still exists. Smaller, less reliable, less trusted. They hired new engineers who don't know what the platform used to be, what it used to be capable of, when people who understood it were allowed to prioritize understanding over emotional workshops. The new normal is just normal to them. They don't know what was lost. Finch left eventually too, burned out from impossible responsibility, from maintaining systems alone that used to have teams of experts. He switched to a different industry entirely, said he never wanted to touch code again. The experience had broken something in him that workshops were supposed to build, but didn't. The lesson is simple. Soft skills matter in some contexts, but they cannot replace hard skills. In contexts where hard skills are required, you can have emotionally intelligent engineers who are also technically excellent, but you cannot have functional systems maintained by emotionally intelligent people who lack the technical skills to maintain them. The systems don't care about intelligence type. They only care about correct inputs. Compilers don't grade on empathy. Servers don't attend workshops. Databases don't respond to inclusive language. Code works or it doesn't, based on whether it was written correctly by people who know how to write it. If you drive those people away because their feedback wasn't nurturing enough, you get nurturing feedback about broken systems from people who can't fix them. Anyway, that's my story about soft skills prioritized over syntax, about empathy workshops during outages, about senior devs forced to quit because their technical expertise was valued less than their emotional availability, about a platform that burned while we discussed feelings, and nobody left who could put out the fire. After we drove away, everyone who knew how. The servers don't care about your tone. They only care about your competence. And if you don't have competence, all the empathy in the world won't bring them back online. We learned that